I never imagined that one patient would make me question everything I learned in 15 years of nursing. He walked into the hospital saying no one could save him, a former military sniper, covered in scars and secrets. Every doctor had given up, but something in his eyes told me there was more than just a terminal illness. What I discovered in the following weeks changed my life forever, and almost cost me my career. This is the most controversial story I've ever lived through, and I can finally tell every detail. My name is Laura Brennan, and I've been a registered nurse at Denver Veterans Medical Center for 15 years. I moved here from a small town in Montana right after nursing school, dreaming of making a real difference in veterans' lives. The reality turned out to be harder than I ever imagined, but also more rewarding than I could have hoped. I've seen it all in these hospital corridors: heroes broken by war, families torn apart by trauma, and miracles that science can't explain. But nothing prepared me for what happened that cold November morning when they brought him in. The patient arrived on a stretcher, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. His file said, Daniel Reeves, 42 years old, former Marine Corps sniper with 3 tours in Afghanistan. Terminal diagnosis, aggressive autoimmune disorder. Prognosis 6 months maximum. But what caught my attention wasn't the diagnosis. It was the way he held himself, tense and alert, like he was still on a mission. His knuckles were white from gripping the stretcher rails, and despite the pain medication, his jaw was clenched tight. The attending physician, Dr. Harrison, briefed me quickly in the hallway. Mr. Reeves has refused all aggressive treatment. He says he's accepted his fate. Just keep him comfortable. Make his last months bearable. I nodded, but something felt wrong. In 15 years, I'd learned to trust my instincts, and every instinct was screaming that this case was different. If this story has already grabbed you, go ahead and subscribe to the channel now, because what comes next will surprise you even more. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I love knowing there are people from all over the world following these real stories. Daniel Reeves was assigned to room 314, a corner room with a view of the Rocky Mountains. I started his admission process, checking vitals, reviewing medications, asking the standard questions, but he barely responded. Yes, no, it doesn't matter. His answers were clipped, military precise, revealing nothing. I noticed his eyes constantly scanning the room, cataloging exits, checking windows, evaluating threats that weren't there. Classic hypervigilance. Many veterans showed these signs, but something about Daniel felt different, more deliberate, like he was purposely maintaining distance. The first strange thing I noticed was his medical history. The file showed he'd been diagnosed 6 months ago in San Diego, but when I asked about his symptoms, his descriptions didn't quite match the diagnosis. He talked about fatigue and pain, but the specifics were vague, almost rehearsed. When I pressed for details, he shut down completely. I said what I needed to say to the doctors in San Diego. I'm not repeating it all again. What's the point? I'm dying anyway. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about him. I pulled his file from the records room, something I probably shouldn't have done, and started reading through every page. The diagnosis came from Dr. Mitchell Bradshaw, a specialist at Naval Medical Center San Diego, but there was something odd about the documentation. The test results were there, but the progression didn't follow the typical pattern for this type of autoimmune disorder. It was too fast, too aggressive, almost like someone had accelerated the timeline. Over the next few days, I tried building rapport with Daniel. I learned he'd grown up in rural Texas, joined the Marines at 19, and spent most of his adult life in combat zones. He'd been a sniper, one of the best according to his records, with over 70 confirmed kills, but he never talked about his service with pride. Instead, there was guilt written all over his face whenever the subject came up. One evening, I brought him coffee instead of the usual hospital food, and he actually smiled. First time I'd seen that. Thank you, Nurse Brennan. You didn't have to do that. Call me Laura, I said, and yes, I did. You deserve more than what this place usually offers. He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something crack in his armor. Maybe, just maybe, he was ready to let someone in. Thank you for staying with me this far. It shows that you feel the same thing I felt when I lived through all of this. So go ahead and subscribe and turn on notifications, because what comes next changes everything. It was during a night shift 2 weeks later when everything shifted. I was making rounds at 2 in the morning, and most patients were sleeping. When I checked on Daniel, I found him sitting up in bed, staring at a locked metal box on his bedside table. He quickly shoved it into his drawer when he saw me, but not before I noticed his hands were shaking. Sorry, didn't mean to startle you, I said softly. Can't sleep. He shook his head. Never sleep much anymore. Too many ghosts. We talked for almost an hour that night. He told me about Afghanistan, about the dust and heat, about watching his brothers in arms die in front of him. But he never mentioned the box, and I didn't ask. Not yet. The next morning, I was reviewing his latest blood work when something caught my eye. His inflammatory markers were elevated, consistent with his diagnosis, but his other levels were completely normal. Too normal for someone supposedly dying from an aggressive autoimmune disease. I compared them to his results from San Diego, and the discrepancies were significant. I needed to see those original test results, not just the summary in his file. I called Naval Medical Center San Diego and asked to speak with Dr. Bradshaw. After being transferred 3 times, I was told Dr. Bradshaw was no longer with the facility, and they couldn't provide his contact information. That was red flag number 1. I decided to do something risky. During my lunch break, I accessed the hospital's medical database and searched for similar cases. What I found disturbed me. There were 3 other veterans, all former special operations, all with nearly identical diagnoses, all treated by Dr. Bradshaw, and all had died within 6 months of diagnosis. But here's what made my blood run cold. None of them had autopsies performed. Their deaths were attributed to their illnesses, files closed, cases buried. I printed everything and stuffed it in my bag. I knew I was crossing ethical lines, maybe even legal ones, but something was very wrong here, and Daniel Reeves was running out of time. That evening, I confronted him, not aggressively, but directly. Daniel, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Are you really dying, or is there something else going on? His face went pale. He looked around the room, almost paranoid, then whispered, "You need to stop asking questions, Laura, for your own safety. Some things are better left buried," but I couldn't stop. Not now. "Tell me about Dr. Bradshaw," I pressed. "Tell me what really happened in San Diego." His eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, the tough Marine exterior completely crumbled. "What I did overseas, what I saw, what they made me cover up," he choked out. "I can't live with it anymore. This illness, it's easier than facing the truth. Now, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching this story from? Write it in the comments." It's incredible to see people from so many places following stories like this. The next few days, Daniel started opening up, piece by piece. It started with small details about his deployments. He'd been part of an elite reconnaissance unit, often working alone or with a single spotter, deep in enemy territory. The mountains of Helmand Province, the villages along the Pakistan border, places where America's wars were fought in shadows, away from news cameras and official reports. "I took out targets," he told me one afternoon, his voice hollow. "High-value targets, they called them. Enemy combatants. Terrorists. That's what the briefings always said. But then came the mission that changed everything. It was 2012, July 15th. He remembered the date like it was tattooed on his brain. His unit received orders to eliminate a target in a small village near Kandahar. Intelligence said the target was a Taliban commander, planning an attack on coalition forces. Daniel set up his position on a ridge overlooking the village, nearly 800 meters away. Perfect shot, clear sight lines, textbook operation. When the target emerged from a building, Daniel took the shot. Clean hit, center mass, just like he'd done dozens of times before. But then everything went wrong. As villagers rushed to the body, Daniel looked through his scope, and his stomach dropped. The man he'd killed wasn't wearing military gear. He was in civilian clothes, and the building he'd emerged from wasn't a military compound. It was a school. Through his scope, Daniel watched in horror as children ran out, screaming, surrounding the body. The man he'd killed was a teacher, not a Taliban commander. The intelligence had been wrong, or worse, deliberately falsified. Daniel reported it immediately through proper channels. He documented everything, filled out incident reports, demanded an investigation. Instead of an investigation, he got a visit from 2 men in civilian clothes who weren't listed on any official roster. They told him the incident never happened. The target was confirmed enemy. Case closed. If he continued making noise, they'd make sure his career ended in disgrace, possibly prison. Friendly fire incident, they'd call it. Negligent homicide. They had the power to rewrite the narrative any way they wanted. So Daniel stayed quiet, finished his tour, and came home carrying the weight of that innocent man's death and the knowledge that somewhere, someone had given him false intelligence on purpose. The question that haunted him every day was why. A week after Daniel started sharing his story, things got complicated. I was called into the office of Dr. Patricia Hendricks, the hospital's chief of medicine. She was a stern woman in her late 50s, with silver hair pulled back tight and glasses that made her look perpetually skeptical. "Nurse Brennan," she said without preamble, "I've received some concerning reports about your conduct regarding patient Reeves." I felt my stomach drop. "What kind of reports?" "You've been accessing medical records beyond your assignment. You've made unauthorized calls to other medical facilities. And according to security, you've been spending an unusual amount of time with this particular patient outside your scheduled shifts." I chose my words carefully. Mr. Reeves is a complex case. I've been trying to provide comprehensive care and understand his complete medical history. Dr. Hendricks removed her glasses and fixed me with a hard stare. "Let me be direct. Daniel Reeves is a hospice patient. Your job is to keep him comfortable, not to play detective with his medical history. There are people very interested in ensuring this patient receives appropriate care without unnecessary complications. Do you understand what I'm telling you? The way she emphasized appropriate care sent chills down my spine. Who are these interested people? I asked. That's not your concern. Your concern is following hospital protocols. Consider this an official warning. Any further deviation from standard care procedures will result in suspension and possible termination. I left her office shaking, but not from fear. From anger. Someone was actively preventing me from helping Daniel, and now I knew it went beyond just one corrupt doctor in San Diego. This involved people with enough power to reach into a Denver veterans hospital and threaten my career. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I contacted a journalist friend from nursing school, Marcus Webb, who now worked for an investigative news outlet. I couldn't give him details yet, but I asked hypothetically about military cover-ups and veteran deaths. What he told me made everything click into place. Marcus explained that there had been rumors for years about certain special operations missions with faulty intelligence, possible war crimes covered up by mid-level intelligence officers protecting their careers. Veterans who tried to speak out often found themselves discredited, diagnosed with PTSD so severe their testimony became questionable. Or worse, they mysteriously died from sudden illnesses before they could go public. Your hypothetical veteran, Marcus said slowly, would be in serious danger if he threatened to expose something like that. These aren't conspiracy theories. There are real people with real power who will do anything to keep their secrets buried. I hung up feeling sick. Daniel wasn't dying from an autoimmune disease. He was being murdered, slowly and quietly, in a way that looked completely natural. Armed with this new understanding, I started looking at Daniel's case from a completely different angle. What if his illness wasn't real? What if the symptoms were psychosomatic, induced by trauma and guilt? Or worse, what if someone had actually poisoned him in a way that mimicked autoimmune disease? I spent hours researching, reading medical journals, consulting toxicology reports. There were substances, rare and hard to detect, that could produce exactly the symptoms Daniel was experiencing, but that seemed too elaborate, too risky. The simpler explanation was psychological. I approached Daniel differently after that. Instead of treating his body, I started treating his mind. I brought in the hospital psychiatrist, Dr. Sarah Chen, someone I trusted completely. I briefed her carefully, leaving out the conspiracy elements, but emphasizing Daniel's combat trauma and survivor's guilt. Dr. Chen spent several sessions with Daniel, and what emerged was devastating. He'd been suffering from severe post-traumatic stress disorder for years, compounded by moral injury, the deep psychological wound that comes from violating your own ethics in war. But there was more. Daniel admitted he'd been intentionally neglecting his health, skipping medications, ignoring symptoms, essentially willing himself to die. The diagnosis from Dr. Bradshaw had given him permission to stop fighting. It was his way out, a socially acceptable form of suicide that wouldn't devastate his family with the stigma of mental illness or self-harm. Dr. Bradshaw had known exactly what he was doing. He'd given Daniel a terminal diagnosis that was just plausible enough to be believable, but vague enough to avoid scrutiny. It was genius in its cruelty, a way to silence a potential whistleblower while looking like a concerned physician providing difficult news. Now the locked box made sense. One night, when Daniel was finally ready, he opened it for me. Inside were documents, photographs, mission briefs, everything he'd secretly kept from his time in Afghanistan. Evidence of not just one wrongful death, but several. A pattern of faulty intelligence that had resulted in civilian casualties, all covered up, all buried. Names, dates, locations, a paper trail that someone very powerful wanted to disappear. And Daniel Reeves, the shooter who'd carried out the orders and kept the receipts, was the last loose end. They can't let me talk, he said quietly, but they also can't just kill me outright. Too obvious. So they gave me this diagnosis, convinced me I was dying anyway, and figured I'd take these secrets to my grave. He looked at me with hollow eyes. The worst part? I almost did. I almost let them win because I thought I deserved to die for what I did. Everything changed after that conversation. I couldn't just stand by and watch Daniel die from guilt and institutional murder. I reached back out to Marcus, the journalist, and this time I gave him everything. He was cautious, wanting to verify before publishing, but he started making calls, tracking down other members of Daniel's unit, requesting documents through Freedom of Information Act requests. It would take time, but the truth was finally going to come out. Meanwhile, I focused on keeping Daniel alive long enough to see it. The first step was getting him proper psychiatric care. Dr. Chen was brilliant, using evidence-based therapies for PTSD and moral injury, helping Daniel process his trauma in a healthy way. But the hospital administration wasn't happy. I was called back into Dr. Hendrix's office, this time with 2 hospital security officers present. Nurse Brennan, you were explicitly told to provide comfort care only. Instead, you've involved psychiatry, contacted external journalists, and completely disregarded your direct orders. I'm suspending you effective immediately pending a full investigation. You're to have no contact with patient Reeves or access to his medical records. I'd expected this, and I'd prepared. Before they could escort me out, I pulled out my phone and showed them the voice recording I'd made of our previous conversation, where Dr. Hendricks had clearly implied there were outside parties interfering with patient care. You threatened my job for trying to properly treat a patient, I said calmly. That's a violation of medical ethics and possibly criminal obstruction. I've already sent copies of this recording, along with all my documentation, to the State Medical Board and the Veterans Affairs Office of Inspector General. If anything happens to me or to Daniel Reeves, it all goes public immediately. The room went silent. Dr. Hendricks's face turned red, but she was trapped. She couldn't fire me without triggering an investigation that would expose everything. We'll be reviewing your conduct thoroughly, she finally said through gritted teeth. You're suspended with pay. Don't set foot in this hospital until further notice. I left, but I didn't go home. I went straight to Daniel's room, knowing security would probably follow me. I had maybe 5 minutes. Daniel, I said urgently, they're kicking me out, but Dr. Chen will still be treating you. Marcus the journalist is working on the story. You need to stay alive long enough to tell your truth. Promise me you won't give up now. He gripped my hand, tears streaming down his face. I promise. Thank you, Laura. Thank you for believing me when everyone else just wanted me to die quietly. As security escorted me out of the hospital, I realized I'd crossed a line I could never uncross. My career, my reputation, maybe even my safety, all of it was on the line. But looking back at Daniel's room, seeing him sitting up straighter, looking more alive than he had in months, I knew I'd made the right choice. The next 3 weeks were the hardest of my life, suspended from work, under investigation, and worried constantly about Daniel. Dr. Chen kept me updated secretly, telling me he was making remarkable progress with treatment. His symptoms, real as they felt to him, started improving once he stopped psychologically willing himself to die. The blood markers that had seemed so alarming began normalizing. It turned out the human mind is powerful enough to make the body sick, and equally powerful enough to heal it when given the right support and reason to live. My family thought I'd lost my mind. My husband James, a high school teacher, couldn't understand why I'd risk everything for one patient. We have a mortgage, Laura. We have 2 kids in college. You could lose your nursing license over this. What were you thinking? I tried to explain the moral obligation, the cover-up, the lives at stake, but to him it just sounded like dangerous idealism. My parents, back in Montana, were even worse. They'd worked hard to help me through nursing school, and now I was throwing away a stable career for what my father called a conspiracy theory. But my sister Rachel, a social worker in Seattle, got it. She'd seen enough institutional corruption in her own work. Sometimes doing the right thing costs everything, she told me during a late-night phone call. But you can live with that. You can't live with staying silent when someone needs you to speak up. Marcus the journalist finally published his investigation. It was explosive. He'd tracked down 4 members of Daniel's unit, 2 of whom confirmed the incident with the teacher. He'd found the family of the dead man through contacts in Afghanistan, obtained death certificates, school records proving the victim's identity. He'd documented the pattern of faulty intelligence in that region during 2012, all funneled through the same intelligence officer, a man named Colonel Bradley Ashton, who'd later been quietly reassigned stateside after too many questionable calls. And he'd found the other veterans Dr. Bradshaw had treated, the ones who'd died, and gotten their families to agree to exhumations and toxicology tests. The story went viral within hours. Suddenly, I wasn't a rogue nurse anymore. I was a whistleblower, a hero to some, a traitor to others. The hospital was forced to lift my suspension and reinstate me while their investigation continued, though I knew I'd never be truly welcome there again. The Veterans Affairs Inspector General launched a formal investigation into Dr. Bradshaw, Colonel Ashton, and the entire chain of command involved in the cover-up. And Daniel Reeves, the broken sniper who'd been ready to die quietly, became the star witness in what would become one of the biggest military scandals in recent history. But justice comes with a price, and I was about to learn just how high that price could be. Daniel's recovery was nothing short of miraculous. With proper psychiatric treatment, support, and most importantly, a reason to keep living, his health completely turned around. Dr. Chen had been right all along. It was moral injury and complex PTSD manifesting as physical illness. His body had been shutting down because his mind couldn't bear the weight of guilt and secrets anymore. But once he had a path to redemption, to making things right by exposing the truth, his will to live returned, and his body followed. Within 6 weeks, he was walking the hospital corridors. Within 8 weeks, he was discharged to outpatient care. The dying sniper everyone had written off was very much alive, but the investigation brought devastating revelations. Colonel Ashton had been running an off-books intelligence operation, providing intentionally bad targeting information to create civilian casualties that could then be blamed on enemy forces, justifying continued military presence and funding for his unit. It was career advancement built on innocent bodies. Dr. Bradshaw had been his cleanup crew, identifying veterans who knew too much and either convincing them they were crazy or, in cases like Daniel's, convincing them they were dying. Of the 4 veterans Bradshaw had treated, 2 had actually been slowly poisoned with substances that mimicked autoimmune disorders. The exhumations Marcus arranged proved it. 2 murdered American veterans, killed by their own people to protect a corrupt officer's career. The scandal reached all the way to the Pentagon. Colonel Ashton was arrested, charged with conspiracy, murder, and a list of military crimes longer than I could read. Dr. Bradshaw fled the country, last seen in a nation with no extradition treaty. Several other officers faced courts-martial. It was a systematic corruption that had cost American lives, Afghan civilian lives, and nearly cost Daniel his life too. Daniel testified before Congress, his voice steady, telling the truth he'd been carrying for years. The teacher he'd killed, Mahmoud Khalil, had been a peaceful man, beloved in his village, teaching children to read and write. Daniel couldn't bring him back, but he could make sure his death wasn't covered up, that his name was remembered, that his family knew the truth. For me, the consequences were mixed. The hospital cleared me of wrongdoing in their investigation, but the political pressure was intense. I was a liability, someone who'd challenged the system and won. 6 months after Daniel's discharge, I was offered a generous early retirement package. The message was clear: leave quietly or face a hostile work environment forever. I took the package. 15 years of nursing ended not because I did something wrong, but because I did something right. My marriage survived, barely. James eventually understood why I'd done what I did, but the stress had created cracks that would take years to fully heal. My relationship with my parents remained strained. They saw my early retirement as failure, not principle. But I could look at myself in the mirror every morning, and that counted for something. 2 years later, I'm working at a small clinic in Colorado Springs, treating veterans with PTSD and helping them navigate the VA system. The pay is less, the prestige is gone, but the work feels more meaningful than anything I did before. Daniel Reeves visits sometimes, healthy and strong, living with purpose. He started a foundation for veterans struggling with moral injury, helping them find the support he almost didn't get. We speak at conferences together, telling our story, hoping it prevents other cover-ups, other deaths, other lives destroyed by institutional corruption. The teacher's family in Afghanistan received compensation, though no amount of money brings back a loved one. Daniel sends them letters regularly, translated through an interpreter, not asking for forgiveness, but offering what accountability he can. The scandal led to policy changes, better oversight of special operations targeting, mandatory psychological screening for veterans coming home from morally complex deployments, and reforms in how the VA handles whistleblowers. Small victories, but victories nonetheless. Some days I wonder what would have happened if I'd just followed orders, kept my head down, let Daniel die quietly like they wanted. I'd still have my career at the Veterans Hospital. My family relationships would be easier. My retirement account would be fuller, but Daniel Reeves would be dead. Colonel Ashton would still be operating, and Mahmoud Khalil's murder would remain covered up forever. There's a photo on my desk at the clinic. It's Daniel, healthy and smiling, standing with Dr. Chen and me at a veterans advocacy conference. We're all wearing blue ribbons, the symbol of moral injury awareness. Under the photo, Daniel wrote a quote: "The truth will set you free, but first it will cost you everything." That's the lesson I learned through all of this. Doing the right thing, truly right thing, often costs more than we want to pay. It cost me my career, my easy life, my comfortable relationships, but it saved a life, exposed corruption, and helped me become the person I actually wanted to be, not just the person who followed the rules. This story transformed me forever. I lost a lot, but I gained something no degree could give me, the certainty that doing what's right is worth any sacrifice. Now I want to know, would you have done the same in my place? What would you do if you discovered a patient was self-destructing because of a secret no one wanted to hear? Leave your opinion in the comments. I read them all, and I love knowing what you think. If this story touched you in any way, subscribe to the channel now. We have dozens of real stories like this, stories no one has the courage to tell, but that need to be heard. And don't forget to watch the next recommended video. It's about a nurse who discovered an organ trafficking scheme inside her own hospital. You won't believe what happened.